or you don't feel right, or if you have a nasty rash, keeping you up at night. Don't worry about a thing.
Don't worry.
'Cause Atticus Health will make you feel alright.
I'm Ilana Razbash, and this is Radio Architecture.
Good evening from beautiful Bunurong country. We are broadcasting to you live on Radio Karam exactly 2 years since we first started this program. Welcome back for another night of Radio Architecture by Studio Razbash. I also hope you've been out the last couple of nights and over the weekend and have been able to see the amazing Aurora Australis that's been gracing this sky. And so I've been thinking about the Bunurong peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nations and their continuous connection to sky, land, water, and culture since time immemorial. As always, you can join the conversation and text us in the studio on 0493 213 831. We'd love to have you with us. My guest and conversation partner this evening is Stephanie Skyring. She is an architect and advocate for sustainable design. Throughout her life, Stephanie has been a prolific creator with a strong passion for nature and the environment. She began her design career in the fashion industry, spending the first 4 years there before transitioning to architecture. After graduating, she moved to London, and upon her return to Brisbane in 2001, she became serious about environmental issues. She worked for Gorlamatic Architects, which helped shape her philosophy of affordable environmental design. Following her time with Gorlamatic, Stephanie stepped away from practice to focus on the environment. She advised on sustainable solutions for large developments and wrote sustainable development policies for local government. In 2009, Stephanie founded her practice, Skyring Architects, with the mission of providing affordable and sustainable residential design. She assists homeowners with all budgets through her highly successful Design Ideas Workshop service, where she collaborates to create concept plans and assess feasibility. In 2024, as construction costs soared and the urgency to address environmental issues became critical, Stephanie launched an online learning resource called Renovation Collaborative to inspire change. She shares industry knowledge through podcasts to support architects and the community in creating better buildings and promote the work of environmental architects. Her podcast seasons included Season 1 with Renovate or Sell in 24-25, Season 2, Passive House, the smart solution for our changing world, and Season 3, which is starting this July, which will be about sustainable design, the latest science and solutions. Welcome to the program, Stephanie.
Good evening, Ilana. It is very exciting to be joining you. And I'm calling you from Meanjin, Brisbane, the traditional lands of the Turrbal and Jagera people.
So good to have you on. And I haven't had a dial-in guest in a little while, so this is actually a really wonderful chance to talk across our enormous and ancient, beautiful continent.
Fantastic.
Why fashion? That's the first thing I want to know.
Well, it came from just because I was such a creator, like I was always making things as a kid, and whether it started with sticking things together and all that sort of stuff, and then it just evolved into making things. I made lots of clothes for my teddy bear, and that eventually evolved into making things for myself, and then I took it further and studied fashion design. Yeah.
Were you particularly interested also perhaps in the pattern making and the constructability element? Some of those technical components?
Not so much. No, it was really just about design. It was just another avenue to create, really. Yeah, so the fabrics and the textures, I'm very, very much a texture person. So textures and colours and all those fantastic things and just making things. And then architecture is just a step up from there, isn't it?
It is. I want to know what's that tipping point?
What the twist was.
No, what's that tipping point that you decided, no, I want to pursue architecture. I want to study again. No.
Well, I had finished fashion design, and it was fantastic. Like, it was very difficult, like challenging in terms of a lot of work. Like, architecture is a lot of work, fashion design was a lot of work. But it was fantastic. But I finished that, and then I was making things. I was making things for people. I had sort of clients, and they'd come to me looking for formal dresses and wedding dresses and all that sort of stuff. So I was making all that stuff. But the thing was that I was in Brisbane, which is not really fashion central 20 years ago when it comes to Australia. And so I really would have had to have moved down to Brisbane, and I just didn't have the financial backing. And I just was, I think I was just too young and immature at the time. And so then I looked for jobs in Brisbane, and I remember going to this interview in Brisbane, and it was, I think it wasn't wedding dresses. I can't even remember what it was. It was some sort of higher end fashion. And they took me into the interview room, and we went through the factory floor, and there are all the sewing machines, and they're like, yeah, you'll be starting down here doing the pattern making. And I just went, I just can't go onto the factory floor in a factory. Like, I think I was a bit more of a pencil pusher, really. And I just went, I just can't do this. This is just not what I envisioned for my life. And so then but I did love design. And so then I went, well, what can I do? And, got out the old careers book. And I do say that there's so much backstory here, about what was behind this. But I sort of stuck a fork in a careers book, and it came out with architecture. That's not exactly true. But architecture hasn't been my life since I was 6, like lots of architects.
I wonder though, what is your earliest memory of a building or place? And I held off asking this question because I know you're an avid listener of the program. So
Careful. Well, that's a good question, and it's a tricky one, and there's lots of sort of foggy memories back there. But I think that one that stands out for me that is quite telling about design was when I was at kindergarten. So I must have been about 4, and it was kindy photo day, and they had, the photographer was there, and he was setting up for the individual portraits. And he'd set up this easel with a painting on it. And so, he'd call everyone over, and he called me over, and, he's like, there you go, hold the paintbrush, stand up with that painting. And I just looked at this painting and just went, I didn't paint that painting. And I was very, quiet and shy. So that must have been quite big for me to say, look, I didn't paint it. And I was thinking about that painting going, that is a really ordinary painting. Like, that is really just, because I would put so much effort into my work. Like, I just would paint these, 4-year-old masterpieces. And I just didn't want to stand there in front of that. And he's like, no, just hold the paintbrush and stand there. And I was like, oh, okay. People just didn't understand right from the beginning.
But you knew that as a kindy kid.
I know. And I look back at that. I've looked back at that photo since going, am I going to be looking indignant in that photo? But I wasn't. I've got the 4-year-old cheeky smile on. So it was all fine. But I just remembered that, like, just the horror of standing in front of this work. So there were 2 things there. You could psychoanalyze that, couldn't you? There was 2 things there. It was like it was inaccurate. I was standing in front of someone else's work. It's like standing in front of someone else's architecture and claiming it as your own. But also it was a very ordinary piece of work. So it was like, I don't want to be associated with that.
That precision, that architect's precision in there.
The neurotic architect, really particular architect from back when I was 4,
And then when you pivoted, when you got to architecture school, did everything feel right on your journey in that moment? Did you feel like it was falling into place, or there was still...
It took a while. It took a while because... So then that wasn't really true about the fork in a careers book. I did actually try that, but I think it came out with things that weren't quite right. But I wanted to stay in design, and I thought, now what... I should step back there and say architecture just wasn't on my radar at all, because I grew up in like suburban Brisbane, which was like a 1960s built sort of suburb, which was sort of mid-century modern, which does sound very, very cool, but wasn't. It was like, just project housing, but spec built in the 60s. So now I look at some of those houses and go, wow, they're total gems, because they're like way better than houses, houses. But back then it was all very, very, very much the same. Like it there's no detail. it's, I didn't see the butterfly roofs and all those fancy things back then, the floor to ceiling glass. I didn't see any of that. It was just very monotonous and all very much the same. So architecture really just wasn't on my radar back then. Yeah, so, and it really wasn't until I got into architecture. But I should say I got into architecture and I went, it was in the first week, I think, and they said, righto, now, if you're here for the money, just go now. And I just went, oh my God.
That's a classic, isn't it?
I have come out of fashion design. I'm already 23. I've been down the design path of a career where there, it was going to be tough to get money. I've chosen another career which I thought was, highly respected, earned a lot of money, and here I am, and they're saying go for money. So I went straight out of that class and straight over to the careers advisor, and I said, what else can I do? And they said, oh, maybe you can do engineering. And I said, okay. So I went straight down to the engineering faculties and talked to the dean, and I got into the engineering building and went, I can't do this. I just can't do it. I can't. So then I went back to architecture and I thought, I'm going to give this a crack and see how it goes. And it took a while to get into it. And I did feel like a bit of an imposter meeting all those people who said, yes, I've wanted to be an architect since I was 10. And I was like, oh, okay. But then as it went along and it all fell into place. And when I got into design science with environment, that was great because that was when my interest in nature and everything, it all came together.
What advice would you give to your younger self that was unsure what to pursue?
I don't know. Can you shorten down your life experiences? I wouldn't not do fashion. I definitely wouldn't not do it. It was awesome. Like, they could just give you a picture and you could make it. Like, you could draw anything and make it. Like, it was amazing. There's skills that are being lost today because no one can sell. No one can sell. No one can sew anything.
So true.
Yeah.
Such a lost art.
I know. So I keep, my daughter's 11 and I'm like, come on, we've got to learn to sew because no one else can sew. But yeah, so I wouldn't change the path that I've taken. But I don't know if I could have listened to that guy who said, you're not going to earn any money.
Architecture is one of these things. Sometimes you only do it if you must. There's certainly a pull.
I know, it's a passion. It's not a job. It's a passion, that's for sure.
What about it for students rather than your younger self? What advice can you give to a student that's unsure about architecture?
And I do occasionally get asked this question by friends who've got children who are thinking about it. And you've really got to love design, really love. It's weird because the prerequisites are like, well, I don't know what they are now, but when I went through it was English and maths. Like, seriously, that's never going to get you to be an architect. So it was like, you've really got to love design. And I think, I was going to say helping people or working for people, it makes me think of people who say, oh, no, if the clients weren't there, it'd be so much better. But, I think really loving art and design would probably be, and not chasing the big bucks.
It would set anyone up in a really good stead. Well, how did the environmental design as a passion come out for you? I know Brisbane is just so connected to the outdoors and to nature. It's the earliest rising city in the world. Everyone's up and exercising at 4, 5, 6 a.m. because your sun rises so early, right?
It was always really one of my passions. Like, where I lived in this mid-century modern suburban area, down the road there was a fantastic park with fantastic creek running through it, and there was fish and turtles and stuff. So I would always be fishing down there and catching stuff and studying all this stuff that I caught in the creek, and I had endless books about birds and fish and all this sort of thing. So I was really passionate about all that, and I really loved it, and I still do. I've still got frog ponds and all sorts of things like that. And I did think for a while about being a marine biologist or something, but it wasn't. I think the making things, the prolific just maker of things sort of drove me more than the marine biology side. So I was really interested in that. And that was that thing about when I said I got into architecture. And the thing where it all clicked, I remember being in design science where they teach you about climate responsive design and buildings to align with the sun and everything. And I remember the teacher specifically saying, because I always didn't really think about the path of the sun. Like, doesn't it just rise in the east and set in the west? And they said, depending on your latitude, so Brisbane's 23.5 degrees latitude, it will rise 23.5 degrees south of east and set. And I was like, wow, and where the sun rises and sets and how it moves over the seasons is directly connected to where you are, and that you can directly connect your buildings to the earth and just connect it all up. And I was like, oh, that's really special. It's like, all those special, historic buildings and everything over in England, everywhere. So yeah, it was great. So that was the connecting moment where all my worlds came together and there was no turning back.
And you're hooked. And affordable environmental design that really comes to a place of, it's a human right? We often discuss this idea on the program that beauty, having access to good design is actually a human right. It's not a luxury. It's not some special treat and treasure, and good design and architectural services aren't just for the wealthy few. It's actually for everyone, right. And there's always a way to make that affordable, make it accessible, and make it targeted.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I had always wanted to do sustainability, and I think I was interested in sustainability, as I said, from that point. And then, I wanted to do my thesis on something environmental, but then I got given a tutor who was nothing, a thesis tutor who was nothing like that. And he's like, no, you need to do something to do with, commercial buildings or whatever he was interested in. And I wasn't confident enough to say, no, this is what I want to do, and I need to get a new tutor. So that's my other advice for students, is to back yourself and believe in yourself and follow your own values. Because I think I messed around a lot trying to get to the end game, because I was trying to please other people too much rather than listening to myself and going, no, this is my passion and I can do things here. So, I should push ahead that way. So, yeah.
Speak up for yourself and speak up for that voice and that design conviction that it often is emerging in students very early on, even before they can start an architecture program. Sometimes even better, because they don't have any of those preconceptions about what architecture and design is.
Oh, totally. And and because I was listening to your other episode with Rory Hyde he was talking about the urgent job of the student to find out what kind of a designer you want to be. And that's really good advice, but it's also really hard, because you've really got to, before you can work that out, you've sort of got to understand yourself. You've got to understand who you are and what your message is, and understand what your values are, because I think values are really at the core of everything. And that is also my advice to students, really. Like, if you can work out what your values are and then be true to your values and begin as you mean to continue. So stick to them. Like, I was talking about my thesis there, and I went off and, oh my God, I did a thesis on like workspace planning or something. Like, seriously, I managed to spend 6 months writing about that. Like, it was such a waste of an opportunity that I could have really got into something environmental, but I just thought, oh no, you know better, you're the lecturer, as opposed to going, no, work it out yourself. Yeah.
Pushing for yourself or having regret later. That's just universal advice, isn't it, for all areas of life?
Yeah,
I feel
totally,
like we get battered by that message with Instagram, social media influencers and everyone, but it really is true, and especially with design, something that becomes so passionate. So when it came time to finding your own course and finding your own path forward and founding Skyring Architects, what were some of the big ideas for you that were central to starting your practice?
Well, it did start with that, as you said before, that affordable, sustainable design. And a lot of my philosophy actually came from that practice that I worked with, called Medic Architects. So that was their practice as well. And, one of the directors there, Jim Gall, he had done sustainable design and was really into that. And one of the books that I read there, which was really formative for me, was Rural Studio by Sam Mockbee. And that is about a practice in, a really poor area, Alabama, and they basically take demolition waste, so all sorts of things that they find, to make houses and community buildings. I know you know this. I know you know what this is, Ilana, but just that was for everyone. So And, that's just, I would love to make a building out of demolition waste. There's just so much opportunity there. And it could be so awesome, except I've got no construction skills. So really, that is right at the core of my belief system. I grew up with the Wombles. You don't even know what they are. And they used to be little creatures. It was an English, comic show. And they used to go around and collect all scavenged junk and make stuff out of it. It's like, yeah, so I get that. So that was where I was coming from, like humble, like making the most of what you've got. And lots of joy comes from those, simple things,
And
so that was where it came from.
So much craft.
I know, there's craft.
And collaboration in trying to do this adaptive reuse and repurposing of materials, because it takes intention and it takes time and it takes wanting to do it and wanting to make it happen, especially in a market where it's not always cheaper. So there has to be a willpower, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that was where I came from, but it wasn't where I ended up going with my practice so much, because back to where we were before about values and, you get caught up in, I need a job and, I've got this lovely client in front of me and they're really nice and wonderful and they want this house, but they don't really want so much sustainability. And do you know what I mean? So then I got caught up in the realities of life and practice. And some of my projects represent what I wanted to do, but they don't all. So that was sort of how it started. Yeah.
No doubt there were still influences that you were able to make. There were still better choices, more sustainable choices, or
totally.
The
totally.
value
but just
of that good design to somebody's life.
Oh, totally. And that one of the things I did through Skyring Architects, which evolved when I started the practice, and as an architect, I was doing residential design. So you would go out to people's houses, they would want to do renovation or something. And the standard process for an architect is you go out to someone's house and you find out what the brief is, what they want to do, you talk about the process, and then you go back to the office and you write a fee proposal and send it to them and cross your fingers. And so I did a little bit of that unsuccessfully. And then somehow they must have had a floor plan or something with them at one of these, sort of preliminary meetings that I went to. And so I started to sketch ideas and stuff and realised that that's actually what they wanted. Some of these people didn't have the money to do full service. They wanted some direction in where they wanted to go. So from there, I developed a whole service, which was an hourly rate service, which I just called my Design Ideas Workshop service. So I would go to their house, they would have a base plan of some description of their floor plan, or I would take a laser measure and quickly measure up the house and sit with them and, with some tracing paper, and we would look at concept designs, throw some dollars against it to see what would work. We'd start with the dream. It's like, let's price the dream first, and then I'd throw some dollars against it and go, well, that's going to be about 800,000. How's that sitting with your budget? And they'd be like, oh, we've only got about 400. And it's like, that's okay. Let's pull it back. What can we pull out of that? This is what we can do. And so that became a really popular service. And from there, some of those people I would take back into the office, but a lot of them, that was what they wanted. They wanted a concept plan. So I would tidy that up and, we'd go through the process and then tidy that up together into a concept plan. And then I'd say, look, here's an awesome drafty. You can take that to a drafty, but let's get the bones right. So we'd got the floor plan right. We've got it connecting to the yard and the breezes and right size for their family, right size for their budget. And then I could set them free on their way. And so I've done a heap of that.
And what a difference that would have made to the lives of those families to get design input straight up.
They do, and it is absolutely transformational for them, I have to say. They are so appreciative. And I think it's like, for me, it's working in a forgotten space. There's nobody else doing it in terms of, well, I think there's one other person who sort of does it in architecture, but I don't think they do it to turn the jobs away. Like, they don't set them free. It's really to bring them back into the office. But I'm like, what do you want to do? And so most of the time, and now these days with Renovation Collaborative, I always set them free. So I think that it is a forgotten space that architects don't work in, because you can't finish the job. You can't get any photos. You can't get anything that, you can't enter awards with it. You can't do anything with it that advances your own practice of architecture, because you can't build a folio from it. All you can do is build a massive following of people in your area who get your name and want you to, do that kind of work for them. But it is something much needed, like seriously much needed.
Do you have a story of perhaps a family or a client that you've worked with through this service, this consulting service, that has really stuck with you?
There's all sorts of stories. And one of them is, one of the good things about this process is it's very interactive and collaborative. And that was the other reason I started doing it, because I'm going to divert back and come back to that, is that you would, in the office, as architects, we tend to draw lots and lots and lots of sketch options, and then we take them to the client. But that's cost quite a lot of money to prepare all those beautiful sketch options. You're in the thousands. And of them, they're probably going to pick one, or sometimes, depending on what sort of architect, they might not even pick any, or if you've missed the brief, then you've got to do more. So thousands of dollars down the track. Whereas when I sit with them, I can say, okay, now this is what we're doing. How do you like to, your living area? Do you watch TV in it more, or is it, do you watch TV at night, or is it a sitting room? Does it need sun, or is it just a room that can be, a space that's used at night? So just understanding how people work. And I could do sketches quickly and they could follow along. So I didn't have to do the whole beautiful thing. They could follow along. So that collaborative process. So then I had this, to go back to your question, I had this one client once, and sometimes they come up like that. And I think his wife or something might have wanted the service. And so he was coming along for the ride, and he just sat back there with his arms folded. Well, you're an architect, you deliver it. And I said, well, and so I could see him there doing that. And I'm like, yeah, great. That's okay. But I said, look, I can do a great building, but I'm trying to do a great building for you. And everyone is different. So the more you can give to me about how you live, the better building I can design for you. And so eventually, he warmed up. But I seriously had to prove myself for a good hour or so before he'd give me a little bit. And then it all was fine in the end. And he's like, oh, really good. But yeah.
Trust is huge, isn't it?
Trust is huge. And it is. And I think that was also why I started that. And I'm talking about this service in case there are any architects out there who would be interested in doing that. It's a really good way to build trust, because otherwise, how does a potential client gain your trust? They meet you for, half an hour or whatever at that meet and greet where you take the brief and put a fee proposal together. But through the Design Ideas workshop type process, you sit with them, you get to work out how you can communicate together. And they can see that you're listening, that you're trying really hard, that you're on the same page. And so I think there is no better way of selling your services as a person, as an architect, but also showing what we can do and building trust in them. Because after the workshop, they're just sold. You could send them a fee proposal and they're just like, yeah. And I would estimate what my fee proposal would be with them. And they're like, yeah, no worries, let's go. This is what we're doing.
Fabulous. Now, I know more and more architects are doing it. I certainly do that.
Oh, great.
I do consult with my practice studio, Razbash. And I know there's a whole group of architects that come together under Architects GP.
I've seen that. Yeah,
that has been launched by a past radio guest of mine, is Sarah. So there's certainly more and more consulting, and which is great because that means we can all refer to each other. Plenty of architects will refer and connect across our colleagues. But to know that there are others that do also offer consulting services too is always a great opportunity to connect people.
I think it's really good because, as I was before I started architecture just was not on my radar. It just wasn't even there. So I'm not alone in that. There's so many people that architecture is just not on their radar. And, they want a renovation or whatever they want, and they go and talk to a builder. They just don't even know how much we can offer. So just doing that service and getting out there for, that affordable amount, you're getting, I would have had hundreds of clients through that process compared to a standard architectural process where you might have, a couple of clients a year. So I think it's good for architecture as a whole, and it's good for clients to see what architects can do for them.
And also to normalise actually getting design expertise from the professional. and to speak to the
Yeah.
professional about your home. Builders build, but architects design. And if you
That's
really
right.
want a quality of life there, you need to tackle these things at the start. I just hear on a weekly basis, oh, I wish I met you sooner, or I wish I knew you sooner, or I knew. Oh. And that becomes a repeating tune almost. And that's what I really try and communicate to everyone on this program. Just chat to an architect straight up.
Mm.
There's
I know,
always
and
a way.
I would get along those lines, I would get, complaints from people. It's like, oh, I had these drawings from a drafty or something. It's like, you can't ask him to design. You can't, exactly as you said, ask the right people to do the right job. Yeah, totally.
Exactly. You wouldn't go to a pharmacist to diagnose you necessarily. You wouldn't you wouldn't go to a plumber to diagnose you. So go to the right person. If you're feeling unwell, you go to a doctor. If you got a design problem, you
Yeah,
go to an
totally.
architect. And I think that's exactly the analogy that architects GP use with their sort of branding about just bringing that good design to everyone. Well, another way,
accessible.
and accessible,
Yeah.
and another way that you make this accessible and you help people actually go forth on their own journeys of renovation and working is through Renovation Collaborative, and you've got your own podcast. So do you want to tell me a little bit about that one?
Yeah, totally. So that evolved out of the Design Ideas Workshop, because I knew when I set these people free and they went off to a drafty or whatever they did, I knew that they needed more information. And I had at the time created a book that would go with that service. It had lots of all the contacts that we use in the office, because they don't know where to go for tiles or whatever. So I had a big book that went through all the supplies that we use that I would give them as well. But I knew that they needed more information to take them right through the whole process. So Renovation Collaborative started like that. And it started about trying to help people, savvy home renovators and things, do things by themselves. So it started as online courses, which just take you through all the process steps. And then I knew I was going to podcast, and I launched it to beginning of 2004, and then it came to mid-year 2004, and then I started the podcast. And I thought initially the podcasts were going to be about sharing information that I pretty much knew. So that first season that I did, Renovate or Sell, was about costs. So I would be talking to people. When that came out, people really weren't across the cost of construction and how it had jumped to incredibly high levels. So I was like, I really need to get this information out there. So in that particular season, I spoke to people I'd dealt with, so building cost estimator and quantity surveyor. And then I also added into the mix a real estate agent about the cost of houses, and also a mortgage broker, which clients would often ask me about that process of when they got their money. And I thought, I need to know more about that. So I'll talk to him as well. And then I had a financial advisor as well. So I was trying to solve that problem about how do you make a decision about renovate or sell. So that was how that started. But in that season, I was listening to my guests going, wow, there's so much here that I just don't know. Like, I knew a bit of it, but they told me so much stuff. And I thought, wow, I'm an architect practicing. There'll be other architects who are really into this as well, who could, small practice people who could be really helped by that. So then I pivoted Renovation Collaborative a bit and, positioned it more towards helping architects, but also still very outward focused. So not architects talking to architects, but out to the community, giving the community high level professional information that is useful for architects, but they could get it too. So that was where it started, and that was how it pivoted. And my passion for that was always to move on to podcasts about environment as well. But I just had to start with the money, because
that's
at
the
end
first
of the day,
question on everyone's lips.
Yeah. So that's where it was. And so with Renovation Collaborative, then that's how it started. And then it has evolved into the podcast, and then also the CPD for architects, because if you can find some time to learn something, at least you can get some CPD for it. And also, I've been to so much terrible continuing professional development where I haven't learned anything despite trying. So I wanted to do something that was really going to help architects move forward with their practice. And also, thinking about practice, and I was talking before about how in my practice, sometimes I wasn't able to do the level of environmental design that I wanted to. And I think some of that was because of the clients, but also it was because I wasn't quite across some of these environmental topics as well as I could have been. So I couldn't just make the jump into it. So I'm trying to give architects a head start into those topics so they can go, right, these are some basic things about it. This is where I get more information. Yeah. So rather than just being in the dark. Yeah. So that's where it was. And with each, sorry, you go.
I was just curious about circling back to that renovate or sell season, because that's a huge thing for people. Now, interest rates coming down a bit, perhaps people are going to be thinking more in the renovate side. But what was the biggest takeaway for you from that season? What was your biggest learning and the probably number one take-home message?
Well, I did, because I work there was a couple of things. Well, actually, probably the biggest one was actually the mortgage broker, because I hadn't really spoken to a mortgage broker and I had a lot of questions for one. So just about the mortgage broker really should be part of your team from the get-go. Things like, which are coming much more into the forefront now, like prefabricated houses, relocated houses, all of those things, banks are really not too keen to give you money for those things because they can't give you money through that standard process with the building contract. So just making sure that you've spoken to a mortgage broker about that. They'll find particular advisors who will suit your financial circumstances. And also, not so much now because costs have levelled out quite a lot, but as costs were rising, it was really a case of staying in touch with your mortgage broker so that they could advise you if it was still going to be a goer and you wouldn't get left high and dry with this set of plans that you weren't going to be able to build. So I think that's really worthwhile. And that's a really useful, telling all my architect friends to listen to it. And they're like, yeah, that was a really useful episode just to understand from your client's perspective, as an architect from your client's perspective, but also as a potential renovator, understanding how that process works. When what you have to have at each stage, when you get your approval, and they're like, do I get building approval first, or when do I get the final tick off on the money? It's quite, it's a lot of money. So if you're confident, you know where you're going and you're comfortable, you're going to get it, it's so much easier. It's just one thing that you can make a little bit more relaxing in that long process of building a building.
And it all helps make it real, and knowledge is power in that process.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So that was probably my biggest learning. And then another learning was, I spoke to the building cost estimator about costs, and it was really focused around Brisbane. And in a season coming up, I'll probably end up being into next year now, but I will look at costs all around Australia in all the different cities. But because I work in inner Brisbane, which is predominantly renovations on sloping sites. So I was talking to the building cost estimator about general costs for that, and he was talking about how much cheaper it is to build slab on ground with a trussed roof, etc., or even 2 stories on a flat site compared to inner Brisbane sloping site, bad access. Like, I knew there was a bit of a disparity, but it was almost half the price. So yeah, it was a bit of I was like, oh, really?
Again, get your architect early. Involve your architect in the site selection process. If you're not sure, should I buy it? Should I not? Work together early. Identify all these risks, all these challenges, what's going to affect the cost of construction. Imagine buying that land and realising you're stuck.
I know totally. And when I was talking to the real estate agent, we were talking about properties, and he was talking about what was happening in the market, and he was saying, those unrenovated 3-bedroom houses, those old timber 3-bedroom houses, you can get those for a bargain at the moment. I was like, yeah, they're not a bargain though, because then you have to go and renovate them, and you're like, oh, no wonder that was a bargain. $5,500 a square metre later. Yeah, so
there we go.
Yeah, so that was interesting.
So are you then you jumped into passive house, and I wonder, are you a certified passive house designer? I am a certified
passive house designer, and I had a crack at doing certified passive house on a couple of projects. But it's complex, and even after the course, I still had so many practical questions about how it comes together on site. So with that season, I just wanted to go in there and just sort all those problems out. So, and also get the backstory. And in that season, that was really interesting. that first episode, so in that season, that was about, why Passive House. So talking to owners about what it was actually like, where were we actually headed at the end of the day? Well, why were we even doing this? Not about the science, but about what's it like to live in those houses. And then, going through how you design them, the people who can help you, the consultants, and then looking at the differences in Passive House in all the different climate zones, because people who don't know about it go, oh, well, that was designed in Germany. That's not right for Australia. And it's like it is different in every climate zone. So understanding that and laying out the differences in each of those climate zones, really getting to the bottom of that. Yeah. So that was what that was about. But that first episode was very interesting, and talking with the Passive House designers, and it was, some of them were Passive House designer architects who'd built their own houses, and they were talking about the things that surprised them about Passive House that they didn't expect, the unexpected things.
Pray tell, what are some of them?
Well, some of the unexpected things, well, because he was talking about drying. So he was talking about, in your bathrooms, your towels don't get damp, because we were talking, in different climate zones, up here in Brisbane, it's quite humid. So the towels, the bathroom, he said, I've got these teenage boys, and the bathrooms are just not wet and stinky all the time. Like the towels are dry, it's all dry. They're just clean, dry bathrooms, and they just dry out really fast. He said, also, we now allow drying space in the laundry, like a hanging platform or whatever in the laundry, because you can, hang your shirts or whatever in the house and then come home in the evening and everything's dry. So just because it's taking that moisture out of the air, things like that. Obviously, the no mold, the less cleaning was a really major one.
It's the mechanical ventilation too. It's the clean air that's really makes a lot of headway in the Passive House.
It is. It's that filtered fresh air that comes into your house that is the right temperature, that takes the moisture out of the air. So that it would make life easier for you in all those different ways was revelationary, really. It wasn't just about a science thing that saved energy. It was things like that. And obviously, if you've got allergies and things, then it's really transformational, because, you're not struggling through different parts of the year. But having said that, it's not for everyone. It's not for all sites. It's not the be all and end all of solutions. But I felt that season was really useful for architects to understand, like just to get to the bottom of it, so you could talk confidently to clients about what it was about and know yourself. And then from there, you obviously have to go on and do the course or whatever you do, but you knew where you were headed, as opposed to sort of groping around in the dark trying to find out what was going on. Yeah.
No doubt that would be particularly useful for the generations of architects that didn't really study solar passive design back at university when it wasn't part of the prerequisite curriculum
I hadn't even thought of that. Oh my goodness. I hope everyone's studying that. Wow.
Certainly now we are. But also, one of the critiques of Passive House is that it's a bit of a cult. is the joke that those who do certify and come into the canon become quite rigid and strict about it. But there's also so many ideas and tools and strategies and details that you can borrow from Passive House. And even if you don't, if your budget doesn't allow a project that is fully certified, and perhaps that's not the intention, you can still get an excellent outcome. And very good and
absolutely.
Excellent are still phenomenal, even if they're not gold star, multi-tick, Passive House, tick, tick, tick.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And they talk about the importance of actual Passive House certification for that, validating that the house has been built as you thought it would be built, as what's on the plans. Like what is drawn is built. And to be honest, in architecture, I used to think that was what would happen until I went through the process with builders, and you're like, even though you're policing that as hard as you can, what is drawn is not always what is built, especially when it comes to insulation in the walls and all those things that don't get policed properly. So that's what it was about. But yeah, absolutely, just higher performance. Like, it's such an important thing. So I'm pro Passive House, and high performance, but in the right places. You don't need to go and double glaze everything. And I still wonder about, partial Passive House, or I had an interview for my current season about sustainable design, and I was talking to people oriented design up in Cairns and about, passive design in Cairns, and they're saying, most of the house is open, but then you've got one or two rooms that are retreat spaces for when it's really hot. And I think, that's the same for Brisbane as well. And about, is there a balance there that you can seal those rooms up, but by the same token, when you seal them, you've still got to deal with that mold issue. So getting that air in there. So I think there's scope to find a balance between high performance, half high performance, getting that connection. I think there's scope in there to find options.
It's just amazing that how many climate zones we have. It's like seven or eight climate zones just across the east of Australia.
I know.
Just hearing you describe the climate in Cairns and Brisbane is polar opposite to what we're shivering through right now, and winter hasn't even properly hit us in Melbourne, and no doubt plenty have started complaining already. So working with someone who really understands your local climate is also super important.
Oh, super important. I absolutely agree with you. And I was exactly the same reverse when I was learning about Melbourne, just going, wow, that's like, the extremes of the climate. Yeah. And absolutely, one of those things, it's like just knowing that climate, also knowing the breeze location, where the breezes come from, what happens through the day, all of those sorts of things. So critical to find someone local. Absolutely.
With your upcoming season, sustainable design, the latest science and solutions, can you give us a bit of a sneak peek? What is some of that tech? Are you going to be looking into regenerative technologies or any drawdown technologies or battery storage?
It's not super high tech. I'm pulling back a little bit from tech because Passive House is pretty high tech. And so I'm pulling back for everyone and to bring everyone along with me this time. So I will be starting with the principle, like just in the introduction, I'll go through the principles of sustainability. What are we even trying to achieve? It's not just carbon, it's everything. So the whole holistic thing. And then I talked to a researcher at UQ, and he talks about what's happening with the latest climate science, what's the CSIRO saying, what should we be focusing on? And then through different seasons, I get into different aspects. With the season, I'm interviewing architects from all over Australia and into New Zealand, and I'll be looking at each of the principles of sustainable design and what we're doing there. I'll be looking at particular case study projects. So I've searched out these projects and that will demonstrate these points. So one of them looks at regenerative design and circularity. I've got prefabrication with cross-laminated timber and a passive house with so I should just say, before I get too techie there, sorry, just prefabrication and also starting with just the basics of efficient floor planning and planning that doesn't waste space. You're only designing what you need. Also floor plans that are adaptive to be reused in different ways. So different case studies about that. Renewable materials, so hemp, which is super interesting and really topical at the moment and amazing. I've done those interviews. I do all the interviews before I start. So I interview and edit to make it concise and just pull out the key details. But, straw bale, Dara panel is another really interesting thing. So all those interesting topics, heaps of other stuff as well, to just see what different architects have done and, the products they've used, the finishes that they used, always struggling to find what product do you use on timber or, so I've just got into the nitty gritty. I'm a bit of a detail person.
This is it's come full circle indeed. You are a detail person.
Found all that out and I've asked all the hard questions and I'm giving it all back to everyone so they can do their projects better.
I mean, it's super important to make these ideas accessible to the general public and who are, maybe they do your first little workshop and then you're sending them free onwards on their renovation journey. But of course, they don't have the knowledge. They don't have the training. It takes minimum 7 years to become an architect. So you're really giving them a tip of the iceberg insight. And I feel it's almost actually very important to say that sustainability for architects is the bare minimum now. We all basically have to do it. It's part of our national competency standards. It's the bare minimum bare minimum, and all the new and upgraded sustainability provisions in the National Construction Code are still also the bare minimum.
Yes, they are.
And all these techie elements, that's just one small component of sustainability, right? When we talk about sustainability, we think about sustainability in design. It's also about economic sustainability, social sustainability, not just that environmental, but also ecological, and so many broader, expansive kind of ways of looking at it and thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely, so true. And just making that shift, because also with all of these interviews, when I speak to all these amazingly talented architects, I say to them all, in your experience, is the interest in sustainability changing? And some of them are yes and no. So obviously these guys are specialising in the area, so they're getting clients coming to them who predominantly are. But, you know, it's yes and no in the market out there, that's for sure. It has grown. People are more aware, but the knowledge is not there. So there's more awareness, but not necessarily more knowledge.
People definitely want to keep their power bills down and perhaps have a healthier home. It's always comes back to that Hipbocker question. But I really want to encourage people to not think that sustainability is just technical solutions or it has to look a particular way. There's not really a sustainable aesthetic. It's not. Sustainable design can be beautiful and shouldn't really must be beautiful, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that was something else that came through because I speak to all sorts of different people. You know, that messaging around what is sustainable design. And one of my guests really spoke really eloquently about that. And he was doing his Symbiosphere, Rob Norman, and he was doing renovations and keeping the existing building. And that's what I wanted to talk about, the keeping the existing building. And it was an old cottage and everyone else on the team was like, yeah, we've got to demolish this. And he just said, you know, had I known how much it would cost, I probably wouldn't have done it. But he just said it's probably fate how it turned out this way because this building has so much character. And in an affordable building, it's very hard to get that level of character that they have achieved in this renovation. Like those old houses, those old materials, taking things from demolition, old bits of timber, just has this history and story and connection to place that you cannot get from, you know, a new soulless building. Architects can pull it together with, you know, affordable materials, but if you just went by yourself, you just wouldn't get it. No. So that story of joy has come through. Just that striving for joy. Sustainability is absolutely important, but part and parcel with that is you know, that it's so central to life. You know, the experience of being in a house.
That's the social sustainability part, right? That joy. You love the house. You're happy in the house. Yes. You're connected to your neighbours. You're connected to your community. You want to stay there. You want to age in place. You've worked with your architect. You've figured out your floor plan and your levels. You've got the good design in there. You're going to be able to retire and age in that house. You've got your plan for how the aged care service is going to come to you. You won't have to sell up and go to a nursing home. All of that is even social sustainability or economic sustainability. Yeah. It's like thinking past that.
So important.
10 years will sell up once the kids are done from school. It's custodianship of a home. It's planning ahead.
Yeah. And often I find, you know, that's sometimes how clients start. And then, you know, you would know yourself, you do the house for them and then they're so emotionally connected to it, they just can't move.
Yes.
Because when you put your heart and soul into creating something, you know, it's part of the journey, you know, you're just connected to it. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's pretty special.
And it takes a long time.
Talking about that. Yes.
Well, those relationships are long forged, long held. It can be anywhere from 2 to 4 years, right? To bring that project into existence, depending on how big and complex it is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is. It's great. It's big, sustainability.
What does good design mean to you?
Oh, that's such a big question. And I think it comes back to that joy thing and that connection to place. And joy's a funny thing because I never really have talked about joy. And it was only doing these interviews and people talking it back to me and going, wow, like joy is critical in everything and in every decision I make, but I don't register it. So just being aware of it
Has having those conversations now made you more conscious of joy as a designer?
100%. And it made me think about a conversation I was, having with my husband a while ago, and we were talking about, possibly buying a new house or doing something different. And I was like, because I'd renovated our house, and I was like, I just can't live in an ordinary house. I just can't live in it would have to be an interesting house. It doesn't have to be a new house, an old house or just something with character. And what I'm talking about there, of course, is that joy, that connection, that interest in the building, not just a bland space, a soulless space. It's a space that's interesting. It connects to the outside, the yard, the climate, the trees, the sky, the spaces are interesting, the textures are interesting. And all of that is critical to good design. And then rolled in on top of that has to be responsible and sustainable and affordable. No easy task.
That's what the architect does, right? That's
Yes.
that's what the architect does and juggles. So, if you want a DIY renovation, pick one. Pick one out of the triad, maybe.
Totally.
It's that age-old adage, time, cost, quality triangle.
Oh, yeah.
Pick two, but it's a tough one for renovators that are going out alone, but they have no choice. In some instances, and no doubt you are making a huge difference and helping them along. And you're one of now many architects who are creating
it's great.
amazing resources, who I'm fortunate to have been guests on my program, who are creating these resources available for the public, like Jen and Lish Fix It Chicks, who have a channel out of Canberra, all over Australia, that are bringing people together and bringing those skills back together. It's almost the same way as we've come full circle in this conversation, how you had those really core skills of sewing that you're trying to pass on to your daughter, but it's these core skills of renovation that you're passing on to the public now too.
Yeah.
I'm mindful of the time, so I want to ask my last question.
Yes.
And that's what gives you hope.
Absolutely. I have learnt that through this current season, actually through all the seasons, talking to the architects give me hope. These amazing architects that I talk to are so passionate about what they do, passionate about affordable, sustainable architecture, trying so hard to do everything they can, just, pursuing every avenue. Just all these great people all are over the world. Well, I've only spoken in Australia and New Zealand, but I know that they're everywhere, people everywhere, just trying so hard to do the right thing. Just, there is so much hope out there. Absolutely. You just have to talk to people and you'll find it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me on the program tonight, Stephanie.
Oh, thank you so much, Ilana.
Thanks for joining me for another evening of Radio Architecture with Ilana Razbash. This live show was broadcast and recorded in the Radio Carrum studio on Bunurong Country. You can replay the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and supporting community radio. Take care.
Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Will.
We're from Fishcatcher, and you're listening to Radio Carrum.